Well, it'd be very interesting to see a solid Western Prairie Province coalition form itself and start to act more independently in some sense within the confines of Canada. At the moment, I can't think of anything that would be better for the West, certainly for the country in the long run, and also for people everywhere else, given that Canada has abundant sources of clean, cheap energy and could provide them in the most politically and economically stable manner possible. Right? Why is that not a good story to tell everyone in the world? And I guess that's part of what we're doing today.
It's an excellent story to tell the world, and I'll add to it food security as well. I mean, I'm very concerned that you've got this same strange don't build anything attitude that is now being applied to our agriculture food producers as well. You've seen in the Netherlands that they want to dramatically reduce the amount of fertilizer use, and we see that our federal government is preposterously proposing the same thing. And fortunately, you've seen in our province here, as well as in Saskatchewan, we've said, no way, we're not going to abide by some arbitrary fertilizer reduction limits, because it means we're going to reduce the amount of food we can produce at a time that we've got a global food security crisis. I was just speaking to a woman who's involved in trying to find food aid for Africa. And she was saying that the projections for starvation are in the 40 million person range. Why are we not talking about that and all the things that we can do to address it?
Well, you know that the planet has too many people on it anyways. And so there's always that little bugbear lurking in the background, that genocidal statement. So yeah, I know, well, the World Bank already estimates that at least 220 million people are in a situation of food insecurity, which means borderline starvation. No, and if the winter is particularly brutal, and maybe it won't be, and good if it isn't, then we're going to see, well, and those sorts of things tend to spiral out of control once they get started. So, no, it's absolutely appalling. Cheap energy and cheap food, that's good for the poor.
It is. It's good for the poor, and it's good for the planet, too. I read a book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness. I don't know if you read it a couple of years ago.
It's a great book.
It is a great book, and he talks about what a great news story we have about the elevation of people out of poverty that has taken place over the last number of decades. And we also find that when women have economic choices, rather than having 10 or 15 children, they end up having 2 or 3 children. And so even those who are concerned about the impact on our resources and whether or not we can support the increase in population, the solution to that is to make sure that we have a good supply of food, a good supply of energy, economic opportunities for men and women, so that we can see everybody elevated to the same standard of living. The prescriptions of the extreme greens is the exact opposite. And it's going to lead to more poverty and more devastation, and it's not going to address some of these issues of economic opportunities for women as well. So I think that we've got such a good story to tell, not only here in Alberta, but also across the country nationally, and also a message for the international community. And I can't wait to get out there and start talking about it.
Part of what's tearing our culture apart at the moment are battles about identity. I'm whatever I say I am. What I say I am is whatever I feel I am, moment to moment. It's intrinsic to me. And that's a really pathological, narcissistic, and egocentric viewpoint, and it's doomed to failure. The young people that I've been communicating with around the world are dying to hear a proper story about identity. And if you say to them, take on some responsibility, have some entrepreneurial daring, establish a long-term relationship, get married, have children, engage civically, right? Grow up and become part of your family, your community, your state, your province, your country, and dedicate yourself to a high-level religious view of the world. Then you have an identity. You're embedded in multiple layers, and that actually constitutes psychological stability and purpose. And the Conservatives have done a very bad job of delineating that vision for young people.
And we always forget that our biggest supporters of all of our institutions, funders of hospitals and wings at universities, and all of our charitable organizations are the people who really did well through a free enterprise, and they feel like they need to give back to their community. That is the full cycle of what conservatism is about. And I don't know why we don't talk about all of that, because that to me is a full vision. I wonder if people know how our country has been established compared compared to others, because as a confederation, there's a great deal of powers that have been given to the provincial order or subnational level of government. Not all governments are structured that way, and I think it creates a little bit of confusion about why we have these battles in Canada.
I think because we have an international audience, I think walking through that would be very useful for people as a beginning of the conversation.
Well, I might go back to an academic journal, because as soon as I started talking about the Alberta Sovereignty Act, of course, there was a mass freakout in the Eastern media. And so I went back to an academic paper that had been written just after the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement had been written in 1993. And at that time, they said you have to be very mindful of how you implement international trade agreements in the Canadian context, because there is a sovereign exclusive level of jurisdiction at the federal level and a sovereign exclusive level of jurisdiction at the provincial level. And they use the term sovereignty interchangeably with autonomy. It wasn't a provocative term back then. And that is really the appropriate way of talking about how we are supposed to operate as a country, that I have no more right to legislate in the federal areas of government. I can't set up military bases. I can't go out and negotiate international trade agreements on my own. I can't, sadly, even manage passport offices, much as my residents here would probably wish I could, because they've been managed so poorly. But it's supposed to be a two-way street. That means that the federal government should not be legislating or interfering in our areas of jurisdiction either. And they do it all the time. They pass legislation that is unconstitutional, force us to go to court to strike it down. They are constantly reaching in to whether it's our municipal level of government or our universities or our middle level management in every single department, trying to get funding deals so that we end up compromising what we want to do here in service of Ottawa interests. And at the same time, they show massive disrespect to us as a province in being able to develop our own resources. So I can tell you that Albertans have had just about enough of this. And it's we've had times in the past where we've had conservative governments at the federal level who've been far more respectful of our jurisdiction and our rights. Even we've had liberal governments in the past that were far more respectful of our jurisdiction and rights. The past 7 years have been a catastrophe in our relationship with the federal government. And as a result, we have to take some pretty dramatic steps in order to save Confederation, to get the country working like it was originally intended to work. And that's what the Sovereignty Act is about. It's telling Ottawa, stay in your own lane. Otherwise, we're going to put up a shield and we're just not going to enforce any of the laws you're trying to impose on us that fall in our areas of jurisdiction or that violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I've been delighted to see that having this conversation, it was initially sort of shocking, I think, for the country, for Alberta to be talking this way. But if you notice, Saskatchewan recently has put forward the Saskatchewan First Act, which is very much along the lines of what we're proposing here. So I think that we've started a bit of a trend, and I think it is going to lead to a better country, a better confederation.